March 12th, 2026. Silvercreek County, Oregon. 18-year-old Rodrick Vaughn walked into Courtroom 4B acting like he was heading to a varsity victory party, not a murder trial. His orange jumpsuit with its white undershirt beneath should have been a sobering reminder of his circumstances. But Rodrik wore it like a fashion statement. Sleeves rolled up to show off his muscular forearms. For Rodrik, this was not justice. It was an act. He maintained a posture of theatrical arrogance, leaning back in his chair and scoffing at the ridiculous notion that a star athlete, a local hero, could be a cold-blooded killer. His defense was simple, and he believed foolproof. His phone had been stolen hours before the crime, rendering any digital evidence moot. The contradiction between his initial charge of obstruction and the ultimate reality of a calculated execution was a gap he believed his charisma could bridge. He was untouchable, or so he thought. But a single forensic digital dump, a hidden trail of encrypted messages locked in the cloud, would destroy everything. While he played to the cameras, while he winked at supporters and mouthed reassurances, the truth was waiting. By the time Judge Alfonso Short spoke his name for the last time, the performance would be over. The arraignment had taken place on a drizzly Monday morning in late March. The Silvercreek County Superior Courthouse was a modern structure of glass and steel, built only a decade earlier to replace the crumbling brick building that had served the county since the 1950s. Inside Courtroom 4B, the atmosphere was electric. Media crews from Portland had descended on the small town, filling every available seat. Rodrick Vaughn was a celebrity in Silvercreek, a star quarterback who had led his high school team to 2 consecutive state championships. His picture hung in the local diner. His jerseys sold out at the sporting goods store. When news broke that he had been arrested for murder, the community split down the middle. Half refused to believe it. The other half had always suspected something dark lurked beneath his golden boy exterior. Rodrik entered the courtroom, flanked by 2 bailiffs, and he moved with the swagger of someone walking onto a football field. He nodded to familiar faces in the gallery, even flashed a quick smile. His attorney, an expensive hired gun from Portland named Marcus Wells, placed a hand on his shoulder as they approached the defense table. Marcus was in his early 50s, silver-haired and sharp-suited, known for getting wealthy clients off on technicalities. Judge Alfonso Short entered, a stern man in his mid-60s with iron-grey hair and eyes that had seen every trick in the book. The courtroom rose and then settled. The clerk read the charges. The State of Oregon versus Rodrick James Vaughn. 1 count of obstruction of justice, 1 count of tampering with evidence, and 1 count of first-degree premeditated murder in the death of 21-year-old Marcus De Leon. The victim had been found in his apartment 3 weeks earlier, stabbed multiple times, his phone and wallet missing. Initial reports suggested a robbery gone wrong, but Detective Hans Tate had suspected otherwise from the start. Judge Short looked at Rodrik. Mr. Vaughn, you have heard the charges against you. How do you plead? Rodrik stood slowly, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. Not guilty, Your Honor. Then he added with a theatrical gesture, I lost my phone at the gym. Maybe the real killer is using it right now. A ripple of laughter came from his supporters in the gallery. Judge Short's expression hardened. Mr. Vaughn, this is a court of law, not a stage. You will show respect, or I will hold you in contempt. Is that understood? Rodrik held up his hands in mock surrender. "Understood, Your Honor. My apologies." But the smirk never left his face. The prosecution team sat at their table, a study in controlled fury. Lead prosecutor Janet Kimura was a woman in her late 40s with sharp features and sharper instincts. She had built her career on taking down defendants who thought they were smarter than the system. Beside her sat her second chair, a younger attorney named David Park, and Detective Hans Tate, who had spent the last 3 weeks building an airtight case. Janet watched Rodrik's performance with cold calculation. She had seen narcissists before, but this one was special. He genuinely believed he would walk out of this courtroom a free man. The judge set a trial date for 6 weeks later and outlined the conditions of Rodrik's bail, which had been posted by his wealthy father, a real estate developer who owned half the commercial property in Silvercreek. As the arraignment concluded, Rodrik turned to the media pool camera at the back of the courtroom, gave a thumbs up, and mouthed the words, "I am innocent." The image would be plastered across social media within minutes. Janet Kimura leaned toward Detective Tate. "He thinks this is a game." Hans Tate, a wiry man in his mid-50s, with the weathered face of someone who had spent decades dealing with the worst humanity had to offer, nodded grimly. "Then let's show him what happens when you lose." The investigation had begun 3 weeks earlier, on a frigid February night. Detective Hans Tate had been called to the Cedar Heights apartment complex at 2:30 in the morning. A neighbor had reported hearing screams and then silence. When officers forced entry into apartment 12C, they found Marcus De Leon dead on his kitchen floor in a pool of blood. He had been stabbed 7 times, defensive wounds on his hands and forearms, indicating he had fought back. The apartment showed signs of a struggle. A chair was overturned, a lamp shattered. But certain details did not fit the robbery narrative. The television was still mounted on the wall. A laptop sat on the coffee table, untouched. A watch, worth several $1,000s, remained on the victim's wrist. What was missing was Marcus's phone and his wallet, both of which Detective Tate suspected had been taken to obscure the real motive. Hans had worked homicide for 23 years, and his instincts told him this was personal. He stood in the apartment, the smell of blood heavy in the air, and mentally catalogued everything. The crime scene techs were already at work, photographing, measuring, collecting samples. A young tech named Sarah Chen carefully swabbed blood spatter on the wall. Another tech, Miguel Santos, was dusting for fingerprints on every surface. Hans walked through the scene slowly. The body was positioned near the kitchen, suggesting Marcus had been trying to reach the door or perhaps a weapon. The knife, a large chef's blade from the victim's own kitchen, had been left at the scene, wiped clean of prints, but covered in blood. Sloppy, Hans thought. Whoever did this was angry, not professional. The medical examiner, Dr. Patricia Liu, arrived at 3 in the morning. She was a precise woman in her early 60s who approached death with clinical detachment. She knelt beside the body, examining the wounds. Time of death? Approximately midnight to 1 in the morning, she said, without looking up. Multiple stab wounds to the chest and abdomen. Defensive wounds on the hands. He fought back hard. Cause of death, likely exsanguination from the femoral artery wound. This one here. She pointed to a deep gash on the victim's inner thigh. He would have bled out in minutes. Hans made notes. Any signs of sexual assault? None apparent. I will know more after the autopsy. Hans thanked her and continued his examination. In the bedroom, he found Marcus's laptop open on the desk. The screen was locked, but the tech team would handle that. In the bathroom, a window was open, cold air streaming in. Hans examined it carefully. No signs of forced entry. It had been opened from the inside. An escape route, perhaps. Back in the living room, Hans noticed something odd. There were faint scuff marks on the floor leading toward the door, as though something heavy had been dragged. But the body was in the kitchen, not moved. What had been dragged? He filed the question away. Sarah Chen approached him, holding an evidence bag. "Detective, we found this under the couch." It was a phone case, black leather, expensive looking, but no phone inside. Hans turned it over in his gloved hands. Victim's phone case? Possibly. We will check for prints and deoxyribonucleic acid. Hans nodded. The missing phone was key. In the modern world, phones contained everything. Messages, emails, bank records, location data. If the killer had taken it, there was a reason. Over the next 48 hours, the investigation expanded. Marcus de Leon had been a graduate student at Portland State University, studying engineering. He had no criminal record, no known enemies. His family described him as quiet, focused, dedicated to his studies. But as Hans dug deeper, a different picture emerged. Marcus had been involved in underground poker games, high-stakes gambling that attracted a dangerous crowd. Financial records showed he had won significant amounts in recent months, and he had also loaned money to several individuals. One name kept appearing in the records: Rodrick Vaughn. Hans pulled Rodrick's file. 18 years old, high school senior, star quarterback. No prior arrests, though there were several incident reports from his school. Fights, accusations of bullying, complaints from teachers about his arrogance. Nothing that had stuck. But the financial connection was clear. Rodrik owed Marcus de Leon $23,000 from gambling debts, and the last payment deadline had been the night of the murder. Hans brought Rodrik in for questioning 2 days after the murder. The interview took place in a small, windowless room at the sheriff's office, the kind of space designed to make people uncomfortable. Rodrik arrived with his father and their attorney, Marcus Wells. Hans sat across from Rodrik, a recorder running on the table between them. "Mr. Vaughn, can you tell me where you were on the night of February 18th, between midnight and 2 in the morning?" Rodrik leaned back in his chair, utterly relaxed. "I was at home, asleep. My dad can confirm that." Hans glanced at Rodrik's father, a heavy-set man in an expensive suit who nodded vigorously. "And before that?" "I was at the gym, working out. Left around 11, went straight home." Hans made a note. "Which gym?" "Iron Valley Fitness on Market Street." "Anyone see you there?" "Sure, the usual crowd. I can give you names if you want." Hans did want names, and over the next day, his team interviewed everyone Rodrik claimed had seen him. Most confirmed he had been at the gym that evening, but no one could say exactly when he left. The gym's security cameras showed Rodrik arriving at 9:30 and leaving at 10:47, not 11 as he had claimed. A small discrepancy, but significant. What really caught Hans's attention was Rodrik's claim that his phone had been stolen that night. According to the report filed by Rodrik's father the next morning, Rodrik had left his phone in his gym locker and discovered it missing after his workout. He claimed he had spent hours that night trying to track it using his laptop, but the phone's location services had been turned off. It was a convenient story. Too convenient. If Rodrick's phone had been used in connection with the murder, the stolen phone narrative would render that evidence inadmissible. But Hans did not believe in coincidences. He obtained a warrant for Rodrick's phone records. And what he found was damning. The phone had not gone dark the night of the murder. In fact, it had been actively used. It had connected to cell towers near the victim's apartment complex at 12:23 in the morning, right in the window of the murder. It had logged into Rodrick's personal Spotify account at 2 in the morning, playing a workout playlist. And most tellingly, the phone's location services had been manually disabled at 10:52, just minutes after Rodrick left the gym. Hans presented this evidence to the district attorney, and an arrest warrant was issued. The tactical team moved in at dawn, surrounding the Vaughn family's sprawling home on the outskirts of town. Rodrick was pulled from his bed in handcuffs, still half asleep, his arrogance shattered for just a moment before it snapped back into place. By the time he was processed and booked, the smoke had returned. The trial began in early May, under clear skies that seemed to mock the darkness of the proceedings. The prosecution's strategy was methodical. Build the case, piece by piece, dismantle the defendant's lies, and present the smoking gun evidence at the moment of maximum impact. The first week focused on establishing the timeline and the relationship between Rodrick and Marcus. Janet Kimura called a series of witnesses who painted a picture of Rodrick as a volatile, entitled young man who believed the rules did not apply to him. A former teammate testified that Rodrick had once broken another player's nose in a locker room fight over a perceived slight. A teacher described Rodrick's pattern of cheating and intimidation, but it was the financial evidence that began to build the motive. A forensic accountant named Gerald Sue took the stand on the third day. Mr. Sue, can you describe the financial relationship between the defendant and the victim? Gerald was a meticulous man in his late 40s who spoke with the precision of someone used to dealing in numbers. Over the course of 6 months, Rodrick Vaughn borrowed a total of $23,000 from Marcus de Leon. The loans were documented in a series of text messages and Venmo transactions. The agreement was that Rodrick would repay the full amount by February 18th, with interest. And did he? Number. In fact, Mr. Vaughn's bank records show he made only one payment, $2,000, in December. By mid-February, he had defaulted on the loan. Janet walked to the evidence table and picked up a printed spreadsheet. Your Honor, I would like to enter Exhibit 7 into evidence. This is a summary of the financial transactions between the defendant and the victim. The judge nodded, and the spreadsheet was displayed on the courtroom monitors. The jury leaned forward, studying the numbers. Mr. Sue, in your professional opinion, was Rodrick Vaughn in a position to repay this debt? Number. His bank account showed a balance of $312 on February 17th. He had no assets, no income beyond a part-time job that paid minimum wage. He was, in financial terms, insolvent. And what typically happens when someone cannot repay a gambling debt? Objection calls for speculation, Marcus Wells said, rising from his seat. Sustained. Rephrase, Judge Short said. Janet nodded. Mr. Sue, Based on the communications between Mr. Vaughn and Mr. de Leon, was there any indication of what would happen if the debt was not repaid? Yes. In a text message dated February 15th, Marcus de Leon wrote, and I quote, "If I do not have my money by the 18th, we are going to have a problem. You do not want that kind of problem, Rodrik." The courtroom was silent. Janet let the words hang in the air. No further questions. Marcus Wells stood for cross-examination, his expression confident. "Mr. Sue, a text message about having a problem is not a threat of violence, is it? It could mean many things." "That is correct. It is open to interpretation, and you have no evidence that my client had any intention of harming Mr. de Leon, do you?" "I am a forensic accountant, not a mind reader. I can only speak to the financial records." "Exactly. Thank you, Mr. Sue. That will be all." But the damage was done. The jury had seen the motive, clear and undeniable. Rodrik needed Marcus dead, or at least silenced, to make the debt disappear. As the trial progressed, the prosecution built its case with the precision of a master architect. They called the neighbors who had heard the screams. They called the first responders who had found the body. They called the medical examiner who described the wounds in clinical, horrifying detail. And through it all, Rodrik sat at the defense table, the picture of arrogance. He yawned during testimony. He scrolled through notes his attorney passed him and smirked at certain lines. During one recess, a reporter caught him signing an autograph for a young fan who had slipped past security. The image went viral, with half the internet calling him a sociopath, and the other half insisting he was being railroaded. But cracks were beginning to show in his defense. The stolen phone narrative was falling apart. On the 7th day of trial, Janet called a witness who worked at Iron Valley Fitness. Her name was Amanda Torres, a personal trainer in her late 20s who had been working the front desk the night of the murder. "Miss Torres, did you see the defendant on the night of February 18th? "Yes. He came in around 9:30, like he usually does." "Did you notice anything unusual about his behavior that night?" Amanda hesitated, glancing at Rodrik. He seemed distracted, kind of on edge. He kept checking his phone like he was waiting for a message or something. "And when he left, did you see him?" "Yes. He left through the front door at about 10:45. I remember because I waved goodbye and he did not wave back, which was weird. He usually flirts with me." "Did you see him with his phone when he left?" "Yes. He was holding it in his hand, looking at the screen." Janet paused. "So the defendant did not leave his phone in a locker. He left the gym with it." "Objection, leading," Marcus Wells said. "Sustained." Janet rephrased. "What did you observe?" "I saw him walk out the door with his phone in his hand." "Thank you. No further questions." Marcus Wells approached for cross-examination, his expression skeptical. "Miss Torres, are you absolutely certain it was a phone in the defendant's hand? Could it have been something else? A wallet, perhaps? It looked like a phone to me, but you cannot be 100% certain. I mean, I am pretty sure." "Pretty sure is not the same as certain, is it?" "I guess not." Marcus smiled. "Thank you, Miss Torres." But the seed of doubt he tried to plant did not take root. The jury had seen Amanda's certainty, and they believed her. The defense's case was unraveling. Then came the testimony that tied Rodrik directly to the crime scene. A neighbor from Marcus de Leon's apartment complex An elderly man named Robert Finch took the stand on the 9th day. Mr. Finch, where were you on the night of February 18th? I was in my apartment, number 12A, right across the hall from Marcus. Did you hear or see anything unusual that night? Yes, around midnight, I heard raised voices coming from Marcus's apartment. I could not make out the words, but it sounded like an argument. Did you investigate? I looked through my peephole. I saw a young man standing in the hallway outside Marcus's door. He was tall, athletic-looking, wearing a black hoodie. Did you see his face? Not clearly. The hallway lighting is not great, but I saw him pull out his phone, and the screen lit up his face for just a second. What did you observe? He was young, white, dark hair. He looked angry. Mr. Finch, do you see that person in the courtroom today? Robert Finch pointed directly at Rodrik. That is him. I am sure of it. The gallery erupted in whispers. Rodrik's face remained impassive, but his hands clenched into fists under the table. Marcus Wells's cross-examination was aggressive. Mr. Finch, you said the lighting was poor, correct? Yes. And you only saw this person's face for a second, correct? Yes, but it was enough. Was it? You are 74 years old. Do you wear glasses? Yes. Were you wearing them that night? I am not sure. So you might have been looking through a peephole in poor lighting without your glasses, and you expect this jury to believe you can identify my client with certainty? I know what I saw. Mr. Finch, is it possible you are mistaken? No, I saw him. Marcus Wells shook his head and returned to his seat, but the damage was minimal. The jury believed Robert Finch. But the most damning evidence was yet to come. In the 10th day of trial, the prosecution began to lay the groundwork for the smoking gun. Janet Kimura called a digital forensics expert named Dr. Elaine Chu, a woman in her early 40s who worked for the Oregon State Police Cyber Crimes Unit. Dr. Chu had spent the last month analyzing every byte of data recovered from Rodrik's phone, which had been seized during the search of his home. Dr. Chu, can you explain to the jury what you do? I specialize in digital forensics, which involves recovering and analyzing data from electronic devices. This includes phones, computers, tablets, and cloud storage. And you examined the defendant's phone? Yes. The phone was seized pursuant to a search warrant, and I conducted a full forensic extraction of its data. What does that involve? I create a bit-by-bit copy of the phone's storage, including deleted files, app data, and metadata. This allows me to reconstruct the phone's usage history, even if the user has attempted to erase evidence. Did you find evidence that the defendant had attempted to erase data? Yes. Multiple messaging apps had been uninstalled and reinstalled, which is a common tactic to delete conversation histories. However, much of that data was recoverable from the phone's backup files and from the cloud. Janet walked to the evidence table. Dr. Chu, I am showing you what has been marked as Exhibit 42A. Can you identify this? This is a forensic report summarizing the data recovered from the defendant's phone. And what is Exhibit 42B? This is a cloud dump from a messaging app called Signal, which the defendant had installed on his phone. Signal is an encrypted messaging platform, often used by individuals who want to keep their communications private. Did you recover messages from this app? Yes. Although Signal deletes messages locally, the app was linked to a cloud backup service that the defendant apparently did not know was active. We were able to subpoena that backup and recover the full conversation history. The courtroom was utterly silent. Rodrik's leg was shaking under the table, a rapid, uncontrollable tremor. Marcus Wells leaned over and whispered urgently in his ear, but Rodrik did not respond. Janet continued. Dr. Chu, what makes this evidence particularly significant? Two things. First, the messages contain explicit discussions of the crime. Second, each message is time-stamped and includes a biometric authentication log. What is a biometric authentication log? Modern smartphones use facial recognition or fingerprint scanning to unlock apps. Signal, in particular, has a security feature that requires Face ID authentication every time the app is opened. The phone logs each successful authentication attempt, including a low-resolution image of the user's face and a timestamp. And what did those logs show? The logs show that the Signal app was opened and authenticated 17 times between February 18th at 11:30 p.m. and February 19th at 3 in the morning. Every single authentication was matched to the defendant's face. The courtroom erupted. Judge Short banged his gavel. "Order! Order!" Rodrick's face had gone pale. He turned to his attorney, his voice rising. "That is not possible. I lost my phone." Marcus Wells put a hand on his arm. "Rodrick, be quiet." But Rodrick jerked away, his arrogance crumbling into panic. Janet pressed on. "Dr. Chu, the defense has claimed that the defendant's phone was stolen. Do these logs support that claim?" "No. The logs clearly show that Rodrick Vaughn's face unlocked the phone repeatedly during the time frame in question. Unless someone else has an identical face and access to his biometric data, which is scientifically impossible, the defendant was in possession of the phone." Janet turned to the jury. "Your Honor, at this time, the state would like to display the contents of Exhibit 42B for the jury." Judge Short nodded. "Proceed." The courtroom monitors flickered to life. The first image was a timestamp. February 18th, 11:53 p.m. Below it, a message. The words appeared on the screen in stark black text against a white background. The first message read, "Meeting him now. He thinks I am bringing the cash." The second message, time-stamped at 12:17 a.m., read, "It is getting heated. He is not backing down." The third message, time-stamped at 12:41 a.m., made the entire courtroom gasp. The job is done. He is not getting up. The silence was deafening. Janet let the message remain on the screen, letting the jury absorb every word. Then she displayed the next message, time-stamped at 1:03 a.m. "Cops think I lost the phone. Wiped it clean. We are golden." And finally, the last message, sent at 2:15 a.m. "Heading home. Stick to the story. Phone was stolen at the gym. No one can prove anything." Janet turned to Dr. Chu. "Dr. Chu, each of these messages was sent from the defendant's phone, authenticated by his face during the hours surrounding the murder. Is there any possibility of error?" Number. The biometric data is conclusive, but the prosecution was not finished. Janet nodded to her assistant, who brought up a new image on the screen. This is the Face ID authentication log for the message sent at 12:41 a.m., the one that reads, "The job is done." The image showed a low-resolution but unmistakable photograph of Rodrick's face, his eyes looking directly at the phone's camera, the timestamp burned into the corner. This photograph was taken by the phone's front-facing camera at the exact moment Rodrick Vaughn unlocked the Signal app to send that message. This places him undeniably with the phone in his possession at the time of the murder. The jury stared at the screen, their faces a mixture of shock and disgust. Several shook their heads. One woman in the back row had tears streaming down her face. Roderick's hands were trembling so violently that he knocked over his water glass. The liquid spilled across the table, soaking documents, dripping onto the floor. He did not move to clean it up. He just stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Marcus Wells looked like a man who had just watched his case disintegrate. He stood slowly. "Your Honor, may we have a recess?" Judge Short looked at Rodrik, then at the jury. "We will take a 15-minute recess. Court is adjourned." The gavel fell. As the jury filed out, several of them glanced back at Rodrik with expressions of pure contempt. The performance was over. During the recess, Marcus Wells pulled Rodrik into a small conference room adjacent to the courtroom. He closed the door and turned on his client, his professional composure finally cracking. "What the hell was that, Rodrik? You told me the phone was stolen. You swore to me you did not have it." Rodrik was pacing, his hands in his hair. "I do not understand. I deleted everything. I wiped the apps. How did they get those messages?" "You did not wipe them," Marcus said coldly. "You backed them up to the cloud. Do you have any idea what you have done?" "We can still fight this," Rodrik said desperately. "We can say someone hacked my account, used my face somehow." Marcus stared at him. "You cannot hack Face ID, Rodrik. It is biometric. It is your face. The jury just saw your face unlocking that phone at the exact time of the murder. There is no defense for that." "There has to be something. We can appeal. We can—" Marcus cut him off. "There is nothing. You are going to prison. The only question now is whether you spend your life there or if we can somehow negotiate a deal." "I am not taking a deal," Rodrik shouted. "I am not a killer." Marcus Wells picked up his briefcase. "Then you are a fool." When court reconvened, the energy in the room had shifted. The jury looked at Rodrik not with curiosity or uncertainty, but with certainty and judgment. He was guilty, and they knew it. Janet Kimura called her final witness, the lead investigator. Detective Hans Tate took the stand, his expression grave. "Detective Tate, based on the evidence presented, what is your conclusion about the defendant's guilt?" "Objection. Calls for a conclusion," Marcus Wells said weakly. "Overruled. The detective may answer." Hans looked directly at Rodrik. "Based on the physical evidence, the financial motive, the witness testimony, and the digital evidence recovered from the defendant's phone, I believe beyond any doubt that Rodrick Vaughn murdered Marcus de Leon in a premeditated act to eliminate his gambling debt. The defendant lied about his phone being stolen. He lied about his whereabouts, and he attempted to destroy evidence. But the evidence survived, and it tells the truth." Janet nodded. "Thank you, Detective. No further questions." Marcus Wells had no questions. The prosecution rested. The defense called no witnesses. What could they say? The evidence was insurmountable. Closing arguments took place the following day. Marcus Wells made a valiant but futile attempt to introduce reasonable doubt, arguing that digital evidence could be manipulated, that the biometric logs could be mistaken. But his heart was not in it, and the jury could tell. Janet Kimura's closing argument was surgical. "Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence in this case is overwhelming. Rodrick Vaughn owed Marcus de Leon $23,000 he could not repay. When the deadline came, he did not ask for more time. He did not try to work out a payment plan. He decided the easiest solution was murder. He went to Marcus's apartment. They argued, and Rodrik stabbed him 7 times, leaving him to bleed out on his kitchen floor. Then, in a display of arrogance that is, frankly, breathtaking, he tried to cover his tracks by claiming his phone was stolen. But his own phone betrayed him. His own face, captured by the very technology he thought would protect him, proved his guilt. The Face ID logs do not lie. The messages do not lie, and the evidence does not lie. Rodrick Vaughn is guilty of first-degree murder, and your verdict must reflect that truth. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood. On the count of first-degree premeditated murder, we find the defendant, Rodrick James Vaughn, guilty. Rodrick's reaction was immediate and visceral. He shot to his feet, his chair clattering backward. "No, no, this is wrong. You do not understand." The bailiffs moved toward him, but he was still shouting. "I am Rodrick Vaughn. Do you know who I am? I am not some nobody." "I am Mr. Vaughn. Sit down," Judge Short commanded. Rodrick turned to his father in the gallery. "Dad, do something. Fix this. You always fix things." But his father sat with his head in his hands, weeping. The bailiffs grabbed Rodrick's arms, forcing him back into his seat. His arrogance had shattered, replaced by raw, ugly panic. Sentencing was scheduled for 1 week later, giving the victim's family time to prepare their statements. During that week, Rodrick sat in his cell, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. He was not going home. He was not going to college. He was not going to play football ever again. His life, as he had known it, was over. On the day of sentencing, the courtroom was packed once more. The victim's family sat in the front row, their grief palpable. Marcus de Leon's mother, a small woman in her late 50s named Teresa, was the first to speak. She walked to the podium, her hands clutching a piece of paper. "My son," she began, her voice shaking, "was a kind, gentle soul. He worked hard. He dreamed of becoming an engineer, of building things that would help people." She looked at Rodrick, her eyes filled with tears and rage. "You took that from him. You took my son's future because you were too proud, too selfish to face the consequences of your actions. You are not a man. You are a coward. And I hope you spend every day of your miserable life knowing what you destroyed." She stepped down. Marcus's younger brother, a college student named Luis, spoke next. "Rodrick, you used to be someone I looked up to. I watched your games. I thought you were a hero. But you are not a hero. You are a monster. My brother trusted you, loaned you money when you needed it, and you killed him for it. I hope you rot." One by one, family members and friends spoke, each statement a dagger aimed at Rodrick's crumbling psyche. By the time they finished, Rodrick was hunched over, his face buried in his hands, no longer looking at the cameras, no longer performing. Judge Alfonso Short watched it all with the patience of a man who had presided over countless tragedies. When the victim impact statements concluded, he leaned forward, his hands folded on the bench. He looked at Rodrick for a long, silent moment. Then he began to speak. "Mr. Vaughn, This court has now heard all the evidence, all the testimony, and all the statements from those whose lives you irrevocably damaged. Before I impose sentence, I want to make sure you understand the full weight of what you have done and the full measure of who you have revealed yourself to be. His voice was calm, measured, but there was steel beneath the words. When you walked into this courtroom weeks ago, you carried yourself like a celebrity. You smirked at the prosecution. You winked at your supporters. You signed autographs during breaks. You treated this trial, this solemn process of justice, as though it were a game, a performance, another stage on which you could showcase your charm and charisma. You believed, truly believed, that you were untouchable, that your status as a local hero, as a star athlete, would shield you from accountability. The judge paused, letting his words settle. But this court is not a football field, Mr. Vaughn. There are no fans here to cheer for you. There is no scoreboard that you can manipulate. There is only the truth. And the truth has destroyed you. He gestured toward the evidence table. You murdered Marcus de Leon in cold blood, not in self-defense, not in a moment of passion. You planned it. You went to his apartment with the intention of silencing him permanently, because you did not want to face the consequences of your debt. You stabbed him 7 times. 7 times, Mr. Vaughn. Do you understand what that means? It means you had 7 separate opportunities to stop, to reconsider, to choose a different path. But you did not. You kept going until Marcus de Leon lay dying on his kitchen floor, begging for his life. The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of Teresa de Leon weeping. And then, the judge continued, you attempted to cover your tracks with a lie so transparent, so insulting to the intelligence of this court that it borders on the absurd. You claimed your phone was stolen. You filed a false report. You looked investigators in the eye and told them you had no idea where your phone was. But the phone knew, Mr. Vaughn. The phone remembered. Every time you unlocked it, every time your face appeared on that screen, the phone recorded it. And those records, those irrefutable biometric logs, proved that you were lying. They proved that you had the phone in your possession during the murder. They proved that you sent messages to an accomplice, bragging about what you had done, confident that you would get away with it. Judge Short's voice hardened. You wrote, and I will never forget these words, "Cops think I lost the phone. We are golden." You thought you were golden, Mr. Vaughn. You thought you had outsmarted the system, but you were wrong. You were not smarter than the evidence. You were not smarter than the investigators who painstakingly built this case. And you were certainly not smarter than the jury who saw through your performance and delivered a verdict that reflects the truth. He leaned back, his gaze never leaving Rodrik. This court has witnessed your arrogance, your narcissism, and your complete lack of remorse. Throughout this trial, you have shown no empathy for Marcus de Leon, no compassion for his family, no acknowledgement of the suffering you have caused. Even now, as you sit at that table, you are not thinking about Marcus. You are thinking about yourself. You are thinking about your ruined future, your lost opportunities, your shattered reputation. But you have no one to blame but yourself. Judge Short picked up the sentencing file. The law provides me with some discretion in sentencing, but in this case, the aggravating factors are overwhelming. You committed a premeditated, brutal murder for financial gain. You attempted to obstruct justice by destroying evidence and lying to investigators. You showed a complete absence of remorse. And perhaps most disturbingly, you believed that your status and charm would allow you to escape justice. These factors leave me with no choice. He looked at Rodrik one final time. Rodrick James Vaughn, it is the judgment of this court that you be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. You will spend the rest of your natural life in the custody of the Oregon Department of Corrections in a maximum security facility. You will never walk free again. You will never play football again. You will never experience the adulation and attention you so desperately crave. The spotlight you loved so much is about to go out, Mr. Vaughn. And when it does, you will find yourself in darkness. Judge Short's voice dropped to almost a whisper, forcing everyone to lean in. You loved the spotlight, Rodrik. Now you will find out how dark it is when it finally goes out. The gavel fell with a crack that echoed through the silent courtroom. Rodrik broke down completely. He collapsed forward onto the table, his shoulders heaving with sobs. Not the careful, calculated tears he had practiced, but raw, ugly, desperate crying. He turned to his father. "Dad, please, please do something." But his father could not meet his eyes. The bailiffs moved in, pulling Rodrik to his feet. His expensive clothes, the carefully maintained image, all of it seemed ridiculous now. He was just a scared boy who had committed a monstrous act and was finally facing the consequences. As they led him toward the side door, Rodrik caught sight of the media camera. For a brief moment, the old instinct kicked in. He started to raise his hand, perhaps to wave, perhaps to make one final gesture. But then he stopped. The camera's red light seemed to mock him. There was no performance left to give. The door closed behind him, and Rodrick Vaughn disappeared into the system. In the days and weeks that followed, the case became a landmark in digital forensics. Legal experts analyzed the use of Face ID authentication logs as evidence, and the case set a precedent that would be cited in courts across the country. Technology companies updated their privacy policies. Law enforcement agencies developed new protocols for obtaining biometric data. The Rodrick Vaughn case became a cautionary tale taught in law schools and criminal justice programs. But for the people of Silvercreek, the case was not an academic exercise. It was a wound that would take years to heal. The community had lionized Rodrik, had believed in him, and his betrayal cut deep. The high school retired his jersey number, not in honor, but in shame. His records were stricken from the record books. His photographs were removed from the walls. It was as though he had never existed. Teresa De Leon and her family established a scholarship fund in Marcus's name, supporting students who demonstrated both academic excellence and genuine character. The first recipient was a young woman who had known Marcus, who spoke at the award ceremony about his kindness and generosity. Life, slowly, began to move forward. Janet Kimura returned to her office and her caseload, but the Vaughn trial stayed with her. She kept a copy of Exhibit 42B in her files, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that arrogance could be defeated, that the truth could prevail, and that justice was not just an abstract concept, but a tangible reality that could be fought for and won. Detective Hans Tate retired 6 months after the trial, his career capped by the successful resolution of one of the most high-profile cases in Silvercreek history. At his retirement party, colleagues toasted him. But Hans's thoughts were elsewhere. He thought about Marcus de Leon, about the young man who had died senselessly, and about the importance of never giving up on the truth. Marcus Wells, the defense attorney, left Oregon and returned to private practice in Seattle. He never spoke publicly about the Vaughn case, but those who knew him said it had changed him. He was more selective about his clients, more cautious about believing their stories. He had learned the hard way that not every defendant deserved a vigorous defense, and that sometimes the guilty were exactly as guilty as they appeared. And Rodrick Vaughn, once the golden boy of Silvercreek, now inmate number 784321, sat in a cell at the Oregon State Penitentiary. He was assigned to a medium security unit, his youth and lack of prior record sparing him from the worst conditions. But prison was prison, and Rodrik was nobody special here. There were no fans, no cameras, no spotlight, just days that blended into weeks, weeks into months, months into years. In his first year, he received letters from a few supporters, people who still believed he had been railroaded. He wrote back, maintaining his innocence, spinning new lies. But eventually, even those letters stopped coming. The world moved on. Rodrik was forgotten. In the quiet moments, alone in his cell, Rodrik sometimes thought about that night. He thought about Marcus, about the look in his eyes as the knife went in, about the sound he made as he fell. Rodrik told himself it had been an accident, that he had not meant for it to go that far. But late at night, when sleep would not come, he knew the truth. He had wanted Marcus dead. And now he would pay for that want for the rest of his life. The phone that had betrayed him, Exhibit 42B, remained in the evidence locker at the Silvercreek County Courthouse. It sat in a sealed bag, its screen dark, its secrets extracted. It was a silent witness to the truth, a reminder that in the modern age, nothing is ever truly deleted, and no one is ever truly untouchable.